where we basically have two more aspects of our discussion. So one, we're going to go through a brief report out session. And so we are going to just talk to some of the things that we learned during the topical discussions yesterday. And then we will close with a facilitated discussion specifically on convergence.
All right, so Emmanuel's going to bring up the summary slides from our discussions yesterday. I'm going to come over here because this side of the room gets neglected a little bit over the last couple of days. So next slide, Emmanuel. All right. So I believe this was our first breakout for my group in the other room. Monitoring of disease agents and markers in environmental settings and
I think this
media.
was my group.
Oh, no, that's actually yours.
Yeah, this was my, okay. All right.
Well, I just wanted to say that this is our summary of what we heard during the discussions yesterday. And as the lay people, we tried to, synthesize everything we heard, put it together so we could report out here and get as much as we could on the slide without covering everything. And if we missed something or misconstrued something, please speak up. Does that sound good?
Yeah, please feel free to let us know. And we have our wonderful documentation team in the back that'll help to document your clarifications. So that'll be really useful. So our first topic area was monitoring of disease agents and markers in environmental settings and media. So some of the things that we observed were basically disease agents like influenza, SARS-CoV-2 are shed in sewage. And there are a variety of different measurement and detection methods that can be applied for gathering useful information and using it to inform decision making. We talked a bit about the use of passive samplers, which are a cost-effective alternative to some of the other more complicated technology alternatives that have been discussed in our day one plenary presentations. But measurements can vary. So there are no universal methods that have been developed so far, and there's definitely room for more progress. We talked about some of the research focuses being biased towards clinical settings and human pathogens. So there are definitely other aspects that are being overlooked, and again, opportunities for expanding research. So some of the challenges. So we talked a lot about trade-offs that exist in research between cost, sensitivity, and speed of detection methods. We explored a number of different application examples in which some of those factors were prioritized. So things like speed and sensitivity in response to COVID and balance and cost in longer term research efforts. We also talked about ethical considerations as another dynamic for wastewater surveillance, including privacy and public awareness. And then lastly, in terms of challenges, we talked about environmental disease transmission, many of the unique aspects associated with that, uncertainties, error rates, and things that need to be taken into account. And so all of these present challenges for being able to make determinations based on findings and use it to inform decision making. So our last category here, future opportunities. So one thing that came up was the potential for utilizing passive samplers. And so we talked about some of the trade-offs in active sampling, things like the potential to miss critical data based on sampling rates and versus the incidents that are occurring that we're looking to sample, and some of the benefits of passive samplers and being able to enhance data collection. And then also being able to expand detection into other agents like air, looking at fungi, things that are often appreciated or studied within the field. Let's see, we talked about integration of data from multiple sources, prioritizing standards for research quality. And so, it was acknowledged we have a tremendous amount of data coming from different sources, and being able to make sense out of all of it is still a challenge. And creating the standards necessary to be able to share that data and to work collaboratively also represented a challenge and an opportunity. And lastly, we focus on research for various different transmission or exposure systems, considering a wider range of geographic settings. So basically, different dimensions to be able to expand consideration. Okay, so from folks who were in our topic one conversation yesterday, anything here that you see grossly misrepresented?
I just have a small minor addition, maybe on the first bullet of the last category to just add comma dust. So like
Yes.
air,
yes.
comma dust, comma, and fungi.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, and any other, anything else that we think may be missing from the summary, key points from our conversation? Please.
Yeah, I guess on the future opportunities, I don't know if that's where you were saying to add the dust, air, and fungi.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there were only, I don't know, I guess I just have a problem.
Do you mind leaning to the mic just a little bit?
I'm concerned about calling air an agent.
Yeah, oh,
It's
absolutely.
a transmission pathway.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we definitely sort of conflated those in the language there. So we'll make sure that's differentiated. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay, awesome. All right, we're going to go to the next category, topic area number 2.
All right, thanks. So our topic was, the first topic in the breakout room was engineering approaches to mitigate disease transmission. So 3 of the major key observations we heard include engineering techniques like filtration, ventilation, and UV are established methods to reduce pathogen levels. These are sort of no-brainers. There's a need to scale up these approaches from small to larger settings. We heard quite a bit about that, and we had a good discussion about expanding and increasing a scale. And modeling for these methods requires extensive databases, especially when considering the diverse nature of air and water sampling. And that leads into our discussion of the challenges on the engineering approaches. Major challenges included the trade-offs of engineering mitigation, such as disinfection, are not fully understood. Difficulty in identifying environmental risks and comprehending the full spectrum of agents involved, both beneficial and harmful. It was interesting in our discussion to hear that distinction, because it's not only about the harmful components, but also the beneficial. And another challenge was establishing collaboration with medical and computational groups is essential, but initiating the partnership can be challenging. And this leads very well into our overall topic about convergence. So for this topic, future opportunities included analyzing comprehensive microbial databases to better inform strategies, revising environmental engineering curricula to address current disease transmission challenges, and fostering collaborations with medical, pharmaceutical, data science, and I think we missed social science in this to build more comprehensive models and solutions. So it was a great discussion. I greatly appreciate everyone's participation. Have we misconstrued or forgotten anything important? Carrie.
I think we also talked a little bit about in situ pathogen monitoring technologies and advancing technologies to do that.
Thank you. Yes, we'll include that.
I just had a question. I mean, what was the thoughts in terms of like revising the curricula? What specific things?
I think it was discussed that the student body can be currently overwhelmed with fundamentals that take a lot of time, and more practical or newer curricula should be included, or at least considered, and potentially minimizing or consolidating the fundamentals. Did I capture that correctly?
I think we were chatting about how convergence can be difficult within the confines of a curricula, because you have, basic things in there that maybe, there's a trade-off with trying to fit everything in and try to get the interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary perspective. And then also there were some maybe aspects of environmental engineering education that could be consolidated or updated or perhaps, not part of the curriculum, especially as environmental engineering sits in other departments that have other goals.
So I can add to that. I think a lot of the conversations was around how we have students that may not have seen biology since high school, and that there's really no space in the undergraduate curriculum as is right now because we keep adding things instead of taking things out and thinking about how to replace it. So that was one of the main drivers in addition to what was mentioned.
I think maybe for clarification of the third point on key observations, when you say modeling for these methods, if these methods are referred to the engineering techniques in the first bullet, then at the device level, we know their performance, but the performance in, say, in building level, in the infrastructure level, that may require more study. So just want to clarify that point.
Okay, thank you. We'll try to incorporate that. All right, thank you.
All right, so we'll head to topic area number 3. So this was our discussion on the fundamentals of disease transmission in the indoor built environment. So in terms of key observations, we began by attempting to establish what it was that was known and well understood. So we talked about processes for emission, transportation, exposure. So we say at a basic level, we do understand how these work, but human behavior plays a significant role, and humans can be unpredictable. So we talked about interventions and the need to be comprehensive based on the variety of different potential transmission pathways, including foodborne, waterborne, and airborne routes. So it makes intervention a bit complicated. But we talked about the built environment as a conduit for multiple pathogens. We had an interesting conversation here about balancing different aspects of sort of why we build environments in the first place: human comfort, sustainability, energy efficiency, and some of the ways in which we can unintentionally create pathogen conduits when attempting to optimize for other reasons. So some of the challenges. So while we understand basic mechanisms, factors affecting transport and viability in indoor settings are complex. And so in many cases, we're gaining an understanding of transport, but it's still unclear. The viability is still an aspect that we need better methods for determining. Indoor environments face external influences. And so things like climate, weather variability, all of these things impact the indoor environment as well. And so there are no one-size-fits-all approaches, and many things have to be taken into account. It also means that some of the impacts of individual studies can be difficult to generalize them as well and apply them to other contexts. So again, multiple considerations: disinfection side effects, trade-offs in ventilation, community communication. So we talked about just a number of different factors that have influence as well. And so things like the potential elimination of beneficial microbes within an environment, or we talked about things like increases in the use of air conditioning versus ventilation, tight building envelopes, humidity levels, all of these different factors that we attempt to optimize, but can work in non-beneficial ways. In terms of future opportunities, collaborations with advanced biosafety labs. So this is something that came up. There aren't enough sort of the BSL-3 facilities for all of the research that needs to be done. So finding different ways to increase the accessibility of laboratory facilities and medical groups and medical information as well can help to enhance the quality of research. We talked about investments that are needed in infrastructure to research pathogen behavior. And we also talked about the need for more comprehensive databases, interdisciplinary collaborations, and a broader focus beyond dominant pathogens in methods specific to emerging pathogens as well. Okay, group 3, folks who are present. Is there anything that we missed? Please.
Yeah, I mean, this is the very first line. The process of emission, transport, and exposure is understood. I don't think that is true.
Okay.
Unless, yeah, I mean, I think we still, like, one of the things we discussed was the relative, like, we don't know it really very well, the relative, for various viruses, we don't know, or pathogens, we don't know whether they're, surface or air, like the ratio, like we have no idea.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
breakdown between the different possible trends, we don't
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
And we don't know what drives it. I think maybe somebody does, but I don't. Yeah.
Okay. No, appreciate that. Yeah.
I wasn't in this room, but I just wanted to point out that I think in bullet 2, there's a distinction between exposure pathways, which are things like food, water, air, and soil, and exposure routes, which are things like ingestion, inhalation,
Gotcha.
or
Okay.
otherwise. So that might be something to correct.
Awesome. No, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we don't always get the terminology correct, so I appreciate those differentiations. We're picking it up as we can. Yes, please.
We also had some discussion about the need to potentially scale up and down with different interventions at different times, that in
Yes,
terms
yeah.
of understanding the transmission that's occurring at any given time, there may be like a lower level monitoring that's happening that scales up if we see something. So I think integrating that in here would also be helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think we also talked about that in the context of different types of monitoring as well. So water, air, dust. Yeah. Anything else? All right, awesome. All right, so we'll go to topic 4.
Okay, so this was our second discussion in the second room. Fundamentals, oh no, sorry. Consideration of the importance of human behavior and risk. We had a robust discussion. It was quite interesting, and actually I really enjoyed it. So key observations include there's a tendency to prioritize generalized conclusions over context-specific ones in terms of, I think, human behavior and law. Wastewater surveillance has legitimate privacy concerns that was spoken about a lot, especially concerning the protection of human DNA and traceability to a point source. Current regulations and law are insufficient in differentiating between public health and law enforcement purposes. And this ties into one of our speakers talking about a particular certificate to protect the personal information of people involved in research studies associated with surveillance of wastewater, et cetera. So major challenges that came from the discussion include there's a need to better understand and quantify human behavior, ensuring the involvement of behavioral scientists. So again, we're asking folks to make sure you include or try to include behavioral and social scientists in these larger projects. Considerations of risk expand to interactions among multiple infectious agents and the protection of marginalized groups. Again, bringing in a little bit more social science. The current perspective on wastewater as mere waste disregards essential privacy concerns, leading to eroding trust in science. We had a good discussion about this in which the legal consultants would just dismiss, like, why does anybody care about waste? It's waste. There aren't any privacy concerns there. It's the fundamental. You've given it away your waste, and there shouldn't be any privacy concerns there at all. But there still are. So future, let's see. Future opportunities include incorporating ethical, social, and legal dimensions into hard science and engineering endeavors. Strengthening community connections, interdisciplinary collaborations, and policies by bringing engineering with legal frameworks. I think that's worded poorly. We'll fix that. Sorry about that. Funding bodies should support cross-disciplinary research and promote more privacy-conscious research methods. So we had a lot of discussion about privacy and what could be done about it. What are the major considerations? Again, I really enjoyed this discussion, and I hope I didn't miss anything really important that you remember for those of you who were in it. And if you have any suggestions on what we've misconstrued, please, I'd accept that as well. Yes.
I was just gonna comment that first bullet is a little bit general. I think,
Yes.
and folks can jump in if I missed this, but I think we talked about concerns about monitoring at small scales, like at a building scale versus maybe at a larger scale, and what that means for wastewater monitoring. So just giving some context to that bullet.
Okay, understood. We'll try to work that back in.
And I think just to add to the description of the summary of challenges is that there is the need to involve behavioral scientists, but one of the overriding consensuses in the room was essentially that we don't know who those people are, and trying to bring them to these discussions has historically been a challenge.
Absolutely.
Understood. And that can definitely be brought into at least some of the short-term solutions that we've been discussing the last couple of days. Anyone else from that breakout session? Okay, thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much. So we're going to move now into our final discussion on convergence. So we wanted to quickly review these topic areas. Also, just a note too, we will be taking time to review all of the notes and documentation more thoroughly. So what we presented here is just a high-level summary that we wanted to use just to help to prompt the discussion that we're about to have. But we will be taking more time to more thoroughly dive into all of the information that's been collected during the workshop to fine-tune the conclusions. And we definitely appreciate the feedback. And so what we'd like to do now, sort of with this primer, we know not everybody had the opportunity to be in every conversation, but we wanted to present some of the high-level results and findings from each group, so we can talk about how it is that these things all combine together and more thoroughly explore the topic of convergence in our final discussion here. So we have still a nice amount of time. Great. So I have a series of questions I'd like to ask, and again, forgive me for sitting down here, but I did recently hurt my back, and it still hurts. So thank you all for your patience. So just a couple of questions that I'd love to collect some reactions from all of you. Thoughts, so everyone is welcome to unmute, chime in. So just in this review that we just conducted and some of the topics that we just reviewed, wondering, did you all notice any themes, any cross-cutting topics that emerged from these day one discussions? Anything that surprised you in terms of what you heard from a group that you didn't participate in?
If I can jump in and state the obvious, but we have these disciplinary divides, and not just disciplinary, but institutional. So, a big one I just talked about is, linking the health sciences and people in medical research and public health research, having a stronger bridge to all the wonderful data we're collecting in the environment. So we really, really, really need mechanisms for those data to be shared, but then in an ethical way and a legally sound way. I wasn't in the session with the lawyer, but from what I understand, she scared the pants off everybody. So we need to take this on. It's really urgent, and we're going to fail miserably at being prepared for the next pandemic if we don't very proactively and intentionally outline these gaps and what are the ways to bridge them. And I think it's very important to be aware of all these legal pitfalls, but at the same time, not be too scared off by them. I mean, we don't want our lives to be totally dictated by what our lawyers tell us or whatever, right? We take that into consideration and we, navigate it, but, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't move forward, right? We just have to find a way that's likely to be fruitful to move forward.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else, other thoughts? Any themes or cross-cutting topics, synergies?
I think just building off of what Amy just said, I mean, I think that one of the ways to think about cross-cutting is to have like databases that essentially are fed by information from water, from air, from a variety or the medical communities. And so thinking forward about having that as kind of a central meeting place makes sense. We haven't talked a lot about data analytics and AI and all those kinds of things, but I think that that's also a key part of thinking forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think traditionally our meeting places have been our technical and scientific publications, right? And as somebody had commented yesterday, it's too much to read across all of these different fields. It's almost impossible to take in all of that information. So I think evolving to these databases, makes sense as a better mechanism for effective collaboration. Thank you. Please. And then I saw your hand. We'll take you in the back next.
I think somebody just said this in the earlier session, or even a couple minutes ago in the summary, education that is cross-cutting is key, and near and dear to my heart is the education of biology for environmental engineering.
But that's a great point. That's one thing that we've that was acknowledged as well, is sort of how packed these undergraduate curricula can be, right? And there's often not a lot of room. And this is, I think, true in every engineering field and most sciences as well. And so being able to find the space to encourage multidisciplinary exploration, but to still make sure that the basic sciences and engineering are being well taught. I think that's a balance that a lot of folks are struggling with figuring out how to do well.
If I could quickly amend that,
Please.
I say biology is near and dear to my heart, but I mean, in general, like we also need to include social science in our education and ethics and other considerations as well.
We had a hand in the back, and then we'll take the two of you next.
Something that came up was the different media that we work in. So air, water, and we kept getting pushed by Mamadou on soil and asking that question. And I think we often align ourselves to one of those media. And some of these conversations have made me think that we need to do a better job talking to each other across environmental media, given that we're working with similar organisms.
Okay, so we'll take the two comments on my right side of the room, and then I saw a hand online, and so we will go to you as well. So in front, yes.
Definitely agree with Andrea's comment. Also, using structured frameworks for integrating data from different fields and across different scales. Lots of modeling frameworks available to do that.
Okay, and we had another comment here in the back.
Thinking back to even Peter's talk, I was really struck by the image of all of the tracing of the routes of potential transmission.
I'm sorry, would you mind leaning towards the mic?
Certainly.
Thank you.
And all those routes of transmission were kind of identified of kind of what the key topic is. And I guess it's coming back to the East Coast, it just reminded me of a Herman Melville quote, where it's saying that we cannot live our lives by ourselves. We are connected by 1,000 invisible threads, and along these sympathetic fibers, our actions go out as results and return to us as causes. And so then it becomes this idea that what we're really involved in is this management of those interactions. And I think that's where environmental engineering isn't necessarily at its strongest. We often treat things as mass balances, where how much water can we distribute, how much waste do we have to pick up, what are the nutrients that we recover from. And so I think one of the broadest desires that I'm hearing throughout is those connections to the other professions that really interact on the daily scale with human interactions, perceptions of risks, actually bring it into seeing how that can be translated to management, where if people adopt masks or if people adopt certain practices into their daily practice, it will interrupt that transmission chain. Because I think one of the strengths that we have demonstrated is the ability to detect the concentration of these in different environmental media, but we're realizing that that's after the transmission event has occurred. To move into that transmission management realm, I think that's where we have to get to the behavioral scientists, to the environmental architects, to architectural engineering even. And so I think that's where also maybe heal the divide between the NSF and the NIH itself.
Okay, and then I believe that we had a hand that was raised online. Esther, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, thank you for unmuting me. I was just typing in the chat. So one of the things that keeps coming up, but I've not seen it expressed as a dedicated or being given dedicated focus, is this interface with the social justice dimension. I think they should be explicit cross-cutting questions that not only look at the issues that are affecting the resource-constrained populations, but also thinking about how do we engage with them in the research process. The NIH has recently made an award that was, at least to me, it was transformative, because they're giving money to community sector organizations to work collaboratively with the academic setting. I think the NSF has programs that have framed as community engaged research. I think looking at all these different models, what is the next generation of co-creating with marginalized and historically disadvantaged communities? How do we better leverage their lived experiences and their knowledge of their social, economic, and cultural context, so that we can jumpstart some of these efforts?
Absolutely, absolutely. Great, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Want to expand on that, or? I see there are a lot of head nods in the room. Yeah, and I do appreciate your comment too, just about providing direct funding for communities to be able to be collaborators in the research. I think that's essential, especially recognizing that there have been folks in communities doing work in environmental and social justice for a long time that haven't been a part of the research communities traditionally. Any other thoughts, any other themes or cross-cutting topics? Yes, Mark.
Something that I heard quite a bit is the concept of putting requirements in to solicitations and programs that the research has to include X, Y, Z, and that ties to this. It also ties to the legal side that we discussed yesterday. But I heard that a number of times, and I think that is a potential way of incentivizing change. And if I heard that wrong, please correct me.
Please.
Yeah, and I'll just say that's really the change of the engineering research centers and how they need to be, all of the research has to be stakeholder engaged. And that's something that I know I'm being evaluated on. So I think that's exactly what you described right there.
Yeah, I'd say I definitely heard that a lot in sort of a number of different ways, which I'd summarize in like, how do we make this stick? You know, in what aspect do we need to change a policy or a requirement, whether that's in academia, in the research community, in architecture, in law, or in policy. So, you know, we create these innovations and we want to impact public health. And so where do we need to make the sticky changes, the policy changes in the greater context of society? All right, last chance. Any other themes, cross-cutting topics? Obviously not the last chance. You can like email us and things like that. So please.
I think across cutting topic is that there's still a lot of need for method development, for concentrating organisms, quantifying, detecting, understand viability versus whether they're there, and some sort of standardization, so that we can compare to each other. So just in general, still definitely work we need to do in terms of method development and probably conversations we need to have with each other to share ideas to make sure that we're kind of aligning on how those methods are working and what they mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Peter, I think to your prior comments on AI, I think there was some talk about, if we can get all of this stuff in more of a machine readable format, maybe we can address some of these issues in reproducibility and in quality by leveraging some tools in AI.
And yeah, maybe data analysis in general is a good one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data out there, and we're not all equipped to figure out how the best way to analyze all that data in a meaningful way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
One thing I'll add to this that I've been thinking about a lot lately is there are a lot of case-controlled studies about how these engineering interventions occur, but none of them are very conclusive. And I think engineers can help in this space to try and better control those settings or get more parameters about filtration or ventilation and help design those studies so that we can get data on in the real world. Do these things work in reducing disease transmission?
Great. Any other thoughts? All right, we're going to jump to our next question, which is where do you see the strongest connections between the topical areas that were discussed?
Maybe quickly and building on the point that was just made. So we do need to continue to march onward towards standard methods, right? And ideally, we need to agree on some standard monitoring points as well. And both the monitoring points and the methods should ideally be informative across media. So like I talked about One Health, so people, animals, environments, clinic, built environment, natural environment. I mean, that would be the ideals, that we have measures that are highly comparable and relevant across media and systems.
Awesome. Anyone else? Any areas we see a strong connection between the topics that were discussed? We've already covered this well, you would say?
Well, I think the data analytics too, so reporting in a way that's relevant across systems and that allows for an integrated analysis.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I would argue that they're all pretty connected to each other. And my brain often works in metaphors. So I think I'll be taking away Kim's bubble as an example, is you need to know the physical processes that are occurring so that you can develop the models, so that you can inform the risks, so that you can inform the public. And so they're all layered together with each other. And then it depends on the scale of finding where the development is needed to advance in certain areas, depending on which pathogen or area of concern we're looking at. It's developed at different levels. So we might need to do data management for one, but we also might need to develop the biophysical model for another. And so then having the flexibility in the program to be able to go across where all those connections are actually occurring, I think is a huge strength that's already emerging.
Absolutely. Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I just want to add on that because I think it is important. What's missing from a lot of them, and I think this is what is being said here, but I just want to make sure that I think could be unique from this workshop is just, it's sort of, like, I think it's this, but it's sort of like when you think about exposure, you know, you have the person in the middle and then you have like one path. And the truth is they're all like the paths can connect, like that's never really shown. And I just think that it's those connections of how it can move between compartments, how things can move between compartments driven by physical, you know, like driven by a lot of different processes that we don't fully understand. And that comes back to figuring out sort of the ratios of the pathways, because that can change depending on the condition. So it's like, it's all, yeah, I think the interconnections are driving that point home, and understanding those better is really important.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll move to our next question. So based on everything that we've discussed, everything that we've heard, do you see any short-term opportunities for exploring convergence research? Even better if it's an opportunity you didn't see before Monday.
I'll just build off what Kim just said. And I think it's really thinking about these interconnections much more explicitly and not being in our air box or our water box or our food box or whatever, but really thinking about how they're all correlated at the same time.
Absolutely. Is there anybody here maybe who's in the dust box who wants to be more in the water box, for instance, right? Are there folks who are thinking about collaborative research in a new and different way? Please.
As the person clearly in the dust box, I think it's so important because there's so much amazing work going on in all these different matrices, and I think it's really going to be through collaborations though, because there's so many amazing experts, you know, in all of these different boxes, and I think those collaborations are going to be really critical to linking these things together in the way that we need to do that.
Absolutely. Please.
I guess building these databases that we've been talking about and building the tools to tap into them and analyze them and setting some standards for what you can put into them. And I know news is working towards that, but that's just wastewater. So how do you bring in all of these other types of data and how do you create that nexus?
Absolutely. Anyone else? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Because that's come up, you know, so many times in this discussion. Anyone have thoughts on sort of how to get started with that, or what that could look like, or who needs to be involved? I think if we had more time, I would want to do a specific action planning exercise just based on that, and to really try to do a deep dive. Please.
There's an NCBI database for bioinformatic data, but we don't have an analog for some of the other data that needs to feed into transmission models in a way that's standardized, and approaching folks who curate data and think about the interface and et cetera might be helpful to establish something like that.
I'm not sure where this goes, but it's just a topic that I don't remember touching on, but it seems important, which is, and maybe it is a convergence topic, is sort of rapid detection, being able to detect pathogens quickly so people know what they're breathing right now. I think a number of, if like pieces are there, I think between, you know, the rapid tests, how you can apply that to environmental, I don't know. I just feel like that's what the world needs. And so I don't know, we didn't really touch on it. I don't know where it would go. But yeah, this more rapid exposure understanding or what people are being exposed to or the health impact. I don't know. I don't know where it goes.
Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Short-term opportunities. Please.
On the database side of things, I know there is a network of clinicians that is set up where if there's a unique disease that's detected in one clinical sample, that they're able to post on kind of like an emergency board and says, has anybody detected this previously? And there are other network infrastructure set up in other professions that we might be able to learn best practices from and have, it's like, well, if one air quality sensor detects this issue or a wastewater monitoring station has this, maybe there's an integrated way where it has not necessarily the same infrastructure that the NCBI database has, but maybe one where it's more coordinated to get to that rapid aspect of things, where there's a communication on the front end where it can actually functionalize the results people are seeing immediately.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just adding on to that, I mean, the analogy that keeps popping in my mind is there's a database for mass spec from different types of samples that Peter Dornstein developed. I can look up the acronym, but it basically, if you identify certain compounds in the ocean or the air or wherever, you plug them into this database and it searches on them and tells you who else has seen them under what conditions. And it seems like it'd be something nice to have for, maybe the metagenomics or something like a searchable database that other people, I think that's a really nice idea that other people, have detected it where, under what condition, that kind of thing, but for back to the different compartments or different conditions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's mass spectrometry. Yeah. And it's really awesome because there's just so many compounds, right? You don't know and this might be important for this too, for the metabolite or metals or whatever, but you can, if you could put in, I mean, the dream would be that you could put in multiple dimensions of that information, not one, but like the set of observables, and just see just to connect people, because so many people are making measurements and so many different things, but I don't know the magic way to do it, but that's kind of like a big picture dream.
And I know we've been a part of a ton of different efforts that are similar, from smart cities to cybersecurity information sharing networks, and so there are lots of different frameworks and other types of communities that have been established to do very similar things. There are models out there. Please.
Yeah, back to the NCBI database one, thinking collaboration with the NMDC, the National Microbiome Data Collaborative, would be a good one. And that one does bring together different disciplines. So that might start getting towards some of the things that were discussed earlier.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to mention too that there's not really a place where a lot of quantitative data lives. You get sequences and stuff, so maybe that goes in with the NCBI discussion, et cetera, that having some place where we can say what sort of concentrations have been observed in water, air, wastewater, soil, et cetera, is helpful.
And maybe even a first step in lieu of databases require curation and time is more emphasis on existing guidelines. So for reporting PCR data, there's MICE guidelines. Environmental microbiology has the EMMI guidelines. And whether we need kind of analogous reporting guidelines for data transparency in similar fields, or just more emphasis on these existing guidelines to ensure there's data transparency with the data work we're already doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Building off the guidelines front, this is more of a question to Carrie. Is there anywhere where a risk database exists, where there's actually a comprehensive compendium of different risk models?
The short answer is no. The closest thing would be the QMRA wiki, which houses dose response models and other elements of risk assessments. So, at least linking to that could be useful.
And I'm sorry, I missed that reference. Okay, it was-
It's called the QMRA Wiki.
Great, thank you.
To talk about data sharing and transparency of data. On the flip side of that is there has been a lot of money spent in the last 10 years or more on big data in private industry. Is there any way to entice the private sector in contributing to large data sets, large risk models, et cetera? Is if there's a way to tap into that, there could be leaps and bounds for the public sector and the goals of this sort of conference and this sort of research, I would think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I guess following up on that, there's each of these databases, but each database includes elements that are basically only interpretable by experts in that field. And so it would need to be like a large collaboration. I don't think, yeah, inviting somebody who's good at big data and just saying, here's all of our databases, make them connect and get the information that you need. And then something else kind of related to that that I was thinking about is having identifiers, like a sample identifier that goes to sequencing, but then into NCBI, and then also to some kind of quantitative database. For NCBI, there's a lot of requirements. You can put in latitude and longitude of where the sample was and what sample type. But in terms of actually linking identical samples from the same location, let's say it's air and water, or something like quantitative and sequencing, I think that's a bigger challenge maybe, unless other folks know of a way that that's already being done.
There's a little bit of it be done on the EBI where it's, my brain is dropping for the metagenome, where they do a little bit more metadata, but there's no cross-scale interpretation of what the results actually mean. They're just housing it with different meta descriptors to it.
All right. Last chance. Any other short-term opportunities? All right, so then our big question, if you wanted to pursue these short-term opportunities, what would be needed?
I think more opportunities like EEID or PIP that are convergent across the health and engineering related disciplines, and some of us, get kicked back and forth between those like NSF, NIH situations.
I think more opportunities to meet people to work with. I think that we all agree it's great to work in transdisciplinary teams, but a lot of the ways that those teams actually come together is through personal connections, relationships. So more, it's hard. No one has time for more meetings. But if there could be creative ways for us to think about how to bring people together in different fields to actually sit down and have conversations, and things like the Gordon Conference are nice, but maybe they're not always as interdisciplinary as we want. But these meetings we can actually meet academically, but also personally to start to build relationships.
Great point. Great point. Yeah, and it can be intimidating to participate in some of these meetings in areas where we don't have expertise as well. It's often not accessible. So I think some sort of medium that helps folks to get exposed to other fields that they would want to work with in a way that's progressive would be beneficial. Yes, please.
And if we're considering more of the database side of things, the successful databases are supported at the federal level, where it has a stable funding source. Because think about the history of like NCBI or EBI, those are huge national initiatives. But other common databases that are used, like Silva, are kind of pieced together by researchers where it actually dominates their entire career, or in the mass bank realm where you go into the path Finder or PathPred or AOVOG biotransformation, those are all independent efforts that are really then dependent upon the researcher to move it forward. But if we're looking at something where we want to have a consistent database where everyone's contributing to it, it will require almost a separate, entire dedicated team to maintain.
In my field, we've seen the same thing with like open source software solutions that have been created within different engineering contexts, right? In the absence of having government support, they're often become outdated and they no longer provide that benefit to industry.
Yeah, I want to add the collaboration with like utilities, like water and wastewater treatment utilities. I found that in nowadays it's actually sometimes it's very hard to work with them because it looks like they need to provide samples to lots of institutes and everyone is very like
Sorry, could you
overloaded.
lean into the mic just a little?
Oh.
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so everyone is very, I mean, and they have lots of work to do. So if there is a way to, you know, better way to collaborate with them, for example, they can like sample once and share like, and multiple institute can share these samples. So they don't need to do like those repeating work and they will be more happy to offer those samples.
Yeah.
I think this is also something that we can consider in the future.
Awesome.
I'll just add, in addition to utilities on the water side, I think facilities and building managers and that kind of thing to allow us to go in and take samples and learn about what ventilation rates are, what kind of controls are already in place.
CY Wu, maybe this is a question for Rebecca. In terms of the supplemental funding for a given NSF grant, can we use that to do database related compilation to make it available to other researchers instead of supporting the undergraduate researchers?
Are you asking in general, can data dissemination be part of the broader impacts plan?
As a supplemental?
As a supplement, I mean, that's going to depend on the particular program and people would need to reach out to the individual program officer. But I would say that in general, whether it's as a supplement or as part of the original broader impacts, NSF wants to see data sharing. That's why we ask for a data management plan. You know, we want to see that those are robust, following the fair data management principles. Yeah, so I don't have a direct answer because it depends on the program as to whether they would do a supplement in that case.
Please.
I think the NSF, some sort of an exchange of students would be beneficial with among different academic labs. I think the NSF intern is restricted to non-academic hosts, but I forget.
I also think one of the major resources we're drawing from is public support, since we're dealing at the interface of where we are trying to interrupt transmission and manage some of the public health impacts that broadly at the moment, and especially in the wastewater realm, where we look at surveys, there is pretty good public support when it's framed in ways that doesn't necessarily hit with politics or viewpoints in that realm. And so how to maintain and engage with the public in which that resource pool doesn't dry up for the different initiatives that are happening. And I think that's more when we're looking at some of the legal and ethical considerations of being able to co-develop and run all of the both experimental and also testing programs to ensure that they're meeting what the public's expectations and needs are.
I think what would also be helpful is conversations with stakeholders who may be the users of the data to try to mitigate transmission risks or health risks, and understanding what type of data gaps they see and what sort of evidence they need to apply the information that we're creating or apply the data. And what are their standards of data collection and data analysis and results.
Adding on to that, I think one of the key stakeholders in all of this is public health. And public health has a large job to do and limited resources and time. And it's often been the case that it's hard to make the case to them that they should collect additional data or organize it in a way to share with us so that we can turn around and prove to them that our data is useful to them. And so some incentive for them to collaborate or additional funding for research on their behalf. And CDC came forward with some of that during this pandemic, but I think in the long term, there needs to be more encouragement of that cross-disciplinary work.
One thing that I think this relates to that from the stakeholder perspective, it's also just public education, of how of all of this, and this ties back into the choices side of things, sort of figuring out how to get there. We've had a number of discussions about that. It's not obvious, but the point is that I think there's just a lot of, countering misinformation. There's just a lot of misinformation that's slowing everything down. And, how can we make sure that, things improve going forward or get better going forward? So as I say, it's with the ultimate goal that, the right things will be done to protect people.
Absolutely.
I just saw you can place an ad for $20. I'm about ready. You can get a billboard. I'm just going to do COVID is airborne billboards everywhere for $20. I'm ready. I'm about ready to. I'm going to fund it myself.
I mean, at that price, why not, right? Yeah. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to move to our last question for the session, which is just anything else. Have we been, in conversation and maybe it sparked a thought? It didn't necessarily fit into any of the other categories of our discussion or any of the questions that I've asked, but you feel it's just worth sharing, Anything else that's come to mind or thoughts that you've had that you'd like to share with the group while you have an opportunity to do so? Please.
Hello. So this is out of the box, but I feel like having more student involvement in this kind of sessions will be very beneficial, because here we learn about the new knowledge gaps and a lot of things which people are doing in different area, apart from just going to the conferences. But this kind of session really helpful being a student, what I can say. And if we are having more students, then we are going to take a lot of messages to home and then able to do in the future some kind of research with that, or able to get collaborations or something like that. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think about in the same amount of time over 2 days, how many research articles would you have had to read to come to the same conclusions and get the same understanding of where the gaps are, right? Yeah, I think it's a very effective, talking to people is a very effective method of conveying information. Thank you. Please.
One thing, very excited by all the conversations that were happening. I think there's also a desire for a bold positional statement of what do we see as success as a field in 5 or 10 years from now, where we could actually say that this is something that we had an impact on. Is it something in the AMR realm where we can say, well, we knocked out this one specific gene that was transmitting? Is it something in the viral realm where we say, well, influenza no longer has the same patterns that we were seeing before? But is there something where we could just say, it's like, well, this is our line in the sand that we could measure how as a field we're progressing forward on? I think would then also communicate well, both to funding agents, but then also the public. Because when we say this is, as we gathered together, the impact that we made.
Great points. Please.
As a sort of subfield of environmental engineering, we sit in between a lot of other fields. And one thing I had a couple conversations with people about yesterday is in terms of a meeting or a conference that brings us together to have these types of conversations. There's some that are kind of coming up. So the Gordon Conference, for example, though it is still slightly different, it's not totally in line when we think about all of it's a built environment, but environment is still really important. So thinking about, is there a meeting point for all of us to come together, and how would we define that meeting point would be an interesting thing, I think, as well.
Anyone else? Going once. All right.
I just want to add, and this came up before too, about the education side. I think also thinking about if we want to train students who work in this field, thinking about pathogen transmission and mitigation of transmission and exposure risks. I think there's also this interesting question I'm hoping we continue having about what the educational underpinning should be. You know, can we train undergraduate students to go into the workforce directly and be able to do this type of work? If so, what would they need to take? What should they be trained in? Does it require a graduate degree? And, you know, is there some sort of specialization, and when does that happen, to be able to have more microbiology, educational material, thinking about risk, et cetera. So I think it's an ongoing conversation that I think will be an interesting one to have.
Absolutely. Please.
So I think that one thing, just building upon this idea about meetings and conferences, I mean, NSF does provide support for exactly what we're doing right now. And in this case, this was one that Mamadou specifically said, we need to do this. But I think that there's definitely opportunity to build upon this and keep this conversation going and make sure that we bring in some of the people that aren't here, that we don't have to have this be a one-off deal.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, again, I want to say thank you all for taking the time to be here and to be engaged and to be a part of the conversation. I think we've learned a lot from each and every one of you. And so we definitely just appreciate you making yourself available and drawing from your past experience, everything that you've been working on in your career to help to inform this discussion. So we're really grateful, and thank you for participating in our discussions and being responsive to our inquiries. It's always really helpful. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much. All right. So thank you. Appreciate it. So at this time, I just want to turn things over to Peter to provide any closing remarks or to talk about sort of next steps.
All right. So next steps, essentially the plan is that we're going to collectively develop kind of a summary document that summarizes, I think, what we saw in those slides today, cleaning up the text and making sure that it all reads nice and is consistent with what we know is the science and the engineering. And that's going to be disseminated as quickly as we can get it done effectively. Then the next thing after that is that we will take a bit more time, look through all the data, look through all of the different things that have been collected over the last day and a half, and then we'll produce a formal report for NSF that all of these are going to be shared with all of you. They're going to be shared with the broader community. And then one of the things that we want to do is to think about as we go forward, what some summary papers or summary kind of outputs for ES&T or some other venue that really try to bring a lot of these ideas and disseminate them beyond just where the local US community would see them. And so that's kind of the idea, but exactly what that's going to look like will kind of depend on what the first two outputs look like. So that's the plan. You should probably get the summary document. We should have it done in the next couple of weeks, I think is our intention. And then we will share that, and then we'll share these other things as well. And I think that as we get the formal NSF report drafted, we will share it with people to make sure that we haven't misconstrued any of the discussions. One of the other things is that we will have on the conference website a location where you will be able to access the slides. So the presentations will be there. And if people want to take out a slide here or there because it was data that they hadn't published before, that's perfectly reasonable. So, but thank you all, and we will see you as we continue this discussion.